if you're living and working as an artist in Brooklyn, chances are you've run up against some absurd circumstances while trying to pay rent and find a place to live. I once took a job as an assistant for the human carpet, which meant that I stood on top of a man rolled up in a carpet in bars and encouraged patrons to stand on top of him as well. In addition to trying to get by on a day-to-day basis, you are prone to the struggle faced by every New Yorker, which is how to coexist with millions of other people who are also struggling and narrowly avoiding the resentment of and towards every human being on the planet. Additionally, if you're living and working as an artist in Brooklyn, you're faced with a lot of stigma and stereotyping of artists living in Brooklyn. We are often portrayed as the hipster plague. We are the virus that is gentrification. We are actually contributing nothing of value to society at large. So the struggle is very real. You are running from your own demons, but also demons that have been implanted by public perception. I have always had the strong desire to help other human beings. And for the past 6 years, as I've been curating and performing in Brooklyn, I have struggled with the possibility that living and working as an artist in Brooklyn is an entirely selfish endeavor. I have struggled to see how my performances, which often involve screaming about American cheese and fatal skin disorders and singing and playing the cello and going ballistic on stage, dumping out suitcases full of food, feeding the food to the audiences, playing around with trash. I've struggled to see that as anything greater than rote shock value and a momentary means of escape. I have struggled with the idea that as an artist, all I am looking for is a momentary means of escape from myself, and I am the kind of human being that is constantly running away from myself. Ultimately, this desire to move beyond an explicitly selfish practice sculpted me into the performer and curator that I would become, but a lot of crap had to go down first. I became very impulsive in my life and in my practice in trying to overcome this idea that I was leading an entirely selfish existence by living and working as an artist in Brooklyn. I considered faking my own death. I considered switching careers, going to med school or mortuary school. I ultimately surrendered to the situation faced by every workaholic, which is to give oneself completely to one's work. So I ran multiple performance spaces at once. When I wasn't doing that, I was performing every night, touring. I was helping direct organizations. I think that part of me felt that if I spent all of my time organizing and working with other artists, I would by proxy be writing myself out of existence, and so this question of leading an entirely selfish existence would become a moot point, but it didn't work out that way. I ultimately succumbed to intense stress and no longer knew how to take care of myself. I wasn't taking showers, I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't eating, and by the end of my 20s I was suicidal and addicted to drugs, and I fled Bushwick to join a cult on Eastern Long Island. I think that the only real possibility for change in one's life is the question of whether or not one should give up that which they love. And I had definitely reached that point. I may not have handled it well, hence the cult, but that question ultimately transformed me. So I broke free of the cult, and eventually, after getting some professional help, I moved back to Brooklyn and attempted to pick up where I left off, albeit in a healthier state of mind, and with a newfound passion. And what I found was that these new performances that I was doing were an expression of the experiences I'd had, being a drug addict, being suicidal, fleeing Brooklyn to join a cult. And I found that these performances were transformative in a way that I had never experienced before. They were, in fact, therapeutic. And I realized that art had been therapeutic for me all along. I just hadn't realized it because I hadn't framed the question correctly. The question being, why make art in the first place? What is so important about making art to you that you have to continue on with it? And I think that this is a question that every human being in the world confronts. Why connect with any other human being? Why form relationships? Why perform any action? Why is it that important to you? How does it keep you alive and healthy? And so I found that by performing this question and performing about the trauma that I had experienced, I was able to connect with other human beings, and form collaborations with other artists in a way that I had never dreamt of before. I found that my collaborations deepened into intense friendships, because exposure and honesty are an art unto themselves. And the more I exposed, the more other artists exposed to me, and the more our collaborations formed art that is raw and honest and powerful and exquisite. I use these experiences, these collaborations, as a platform for a new series, which became the focus of my curatorial attempts. It is called Trauma Salon, and it is an event at which artists perform traumatic experiences in their lives. The event is framed as a form of therapy as expressed through art. So I had a violinist read journal entries leading up to a suicide attempt. I had a percussionist play a voicemail recorded by his daughter, announcing his father's death over and over again. And audience members were able to connect to these audience and reveal information about themselves, and collaborations between artists formed as a result of these events. Deep and intense collaborations that have produced some of the most amazing and intense work that I've ever witnessed. I have no monopoly on the idea that art heals. It is as old as the hills. I think it's one of the oldest forms of therapy on earth, but it is a form of therapy that I think has been lost through the media's portrayal of artists as these alter egos, making art that is imitative and that obscures the artist from the art. We live in a society that worships social media, which adds layer upon layer of detachment between the human being and their identity. One becomes totally lost. One no longer knows what grounds for exposure and honesty are. And this question of whether or not one is leading an entirely selfish existence is complicated. I now live my life in a way that is a cautionary tale for other artists. I believe that I can be a living example of the oldest form of therapy in the book, which is that through making art and framing our trauma as art, we can overcome the devastation of existence through the beauty of creation. And as we do this in a collaborative community, I think that we are able to teach the world at large how to overcome difficult social conditions and interpersonal conflict, the more we expose ourselves and are honest with ourselves, the more we can do so in our collaborations, and the stronger our communities become. And we live in a world that is alarmist, and there's a heroin epidemic, everyone is bipolar, and maybe we'll run out of food, and there is pain and conflict every direction you turn and follow. And artists can teach the world how to adapt to these situations, so long as we are able to keep ourselves healthy and keep our communities healthy, teach each other how to continue living in a way that is sustainable, and that teaches growth and overcoming pain. It sounds pretty utopian, but we have access to the simplest, most fundamental form of therapy in the book, which is making art that makes ourselves and those around us and that we care about feel better. And though this may sound utopian, I do not think by any means that it is an unrealistic thing to continue living for.